Okay, episode 117, Conor Smith. Hello, and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Hey, Mike, today's guest on the podcast is Conor Smith. Conor is a super interesting person. He has a PhD in applied marine physics, is a United States Coast Guard Master Captain, and an ABYC, which is sort of the boat technician certification community, electrical technician. And he's involved with warrior sailing.
Yeah, Bela, this is a really interesting interview, and I think listeners look out for these three important concepts and plenty more. But first is that this idea that every boat should get a healthy boat checkup, kind of just like people. Second, that the electrical wiring of boats is super complicated. I think people know this, and there's lots that can go wrong, but there's ways you can deal with that, and there's ways that you can attack that in a systematic way. And then third is there's really cool programs around like warrior sailing that you just mentioned that are worth knowing about and supporting.
Okay, but before we get started, I have a question for you, Mike. What's the single most important recommendation that we've made for people wanting to get into sailing or improve their sailing skills?
I think this is an easy question, Bela, and that's acquire the knowledge and skills that you need to be safe and prepared out on the water.
Exactly. And given our backgrounds as university professors, we know a little something about education and learning. There are two important elements to learning to sail. First is learning all of the knowledge sailors should understand, like rules of the road, navigation, principles of sailing, safety, and weather. Second is turning this knowledge into skills that you will need to use on the boat, like docking, anchoring, motoring, and sailing the boat from point A to point B.
Yeah, agreed, Bela. And in fact, you and I are very pleased that this episode is sponsored by Nautic Ed, which is short for Nautical Education. And they're an established company with a really cool online platform for learning the knowledge elements of sailing at your convenience on the web, along with a network of experienced sailing instructors for the hands-on skill development elements right on the boat.
Right you are, Mike. Nautical Education has a wide spectrum of sail training modules, from navigation rules to offshore sailing to bareboat chartering. By taking Nautical Education sail training modules, you can get your international sailing license and credentials. These skills are important if you are just starting out in sailing, want to improve your sailing abilities, or are gearing up for a bigger sailing adventure. So listeners, to check out Nautic Ed, click on the link in the show notes, and as a bonus, you will receive your first 2 lessons for free. Now that's a great deal. So let's get right to today's interview. Hello,
Hi.
Conor. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Hey, so let me ask you a question. If you're at a social event and at that social event, you get introduced to someone, and after that introduction, they say to you, "Oh, so nice to meet you, Conor. What do you do?" How do you answer that question?
That is one of the hardest things I struggle with right now. The most accurate thing I can probably say at the moment is a marine electrical technician. But I'm really a just ocean advocate and ocean lover is probably the best way to describe it. I think marine electrician or a marine technician is probably too simplified. But currently that's my day job. I design and install big battery systems for boaters, particularly those that are going off grid who are liveaboards and traveling full time. And so I have a strong background in marine electrical systems, and so applying that to help other boaters right now. But kind of do a full range of electrical services from galvanic corrosion detection and mitigation to different advanced electrical troubleshooting. I have a great toolkit that includes data loggers. So we had one really interesting troubleshooting case where a woman had her air conditioners shutting down in the middle of the night randomly, and she couldn't figure out the rhyme or reason. We were able to put some data loggers on the current draw to see exactly when and how the breakers tripped. We figured out it was just a bad setting in her air conditioner that was causing it to go into a defrost heat mode too soon after cooling, trip the breaker and shut everything down. So, yeah, I think I have a relatively wide ranging skill set and toolkit when it comes to electrical troubleshooting too.
Oh, very nice. Well, I'm a mechanical engineer, so
All right.
I understand mechanical stuff, but when it comes to electricity, it's very, very mysterious to me. And it seems like every boat, particularly given the environment that it's in, at some point in time is going to have electrical issues.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. And, I try not to say that there is magic aboard boats, but despite doing this for a long time, there's still electrical magic that occurs because there's things that just don't make sense. There's confounding results. There's you make a test and then an hour later you can't replicate the same thing you did an hour ago. And I've definitely said before, there's a little bit of magic going on, and I don't understand what's going on. And I hate saying it, but I think that's just some realities, I guess.
Yeah. So
really
let me ask you.
things.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. How often do you see things with brand new boats?
Yeah, just as often as old boats. I mean, probably old boats are a little bit more. The only unfortunate thing is people with older boats tend to certainly need a electrical audit to undo all the mistakes from 40 years of boat ownership that previous owners make. And they're also the least likely to hire somebody to do electrical audit. A healthy boat checkup is almost never done, but it is extremely important because I find all kinds of problems of everything from just the whole gamut. But certainly new boats have lots of problems too. They just maybe haven't been, the problems haven't come to the surface yet. They're safe. There's things are misinstalled. There's screws through conductors. There's the misassembly of fuses. I mean, there's tons of problems on everything. But just because you own a new boat doesn't mean you shouldn't have somebody qualified come take a look and make sure everything's working right. Because, I think even the best, what's the term? When people that commission a boat for the first time, even the best agents that commission a boat, they really go through with a infrared heat gun and test all the connections when you're loading it up? I don't think so, but that should be done on any boat for sure.
Yeah. There's a place, the marina I keep my boat at, there's two folks on my dock, on my finger, that have brand new boats. They just got them this year. I mean, from the factory. And they have all these problems with them. I mean, they have like a punch list of like 25, 30 things, and they're not minor things. It's not like there's a little scratch in the finish on the countertop someplace, right? I mean, they're like systems don't work. Yeah. And I'm like, this is something I've never understood, right? So in my lifetime, I've had two semi-custom houses built, right? A house that someone built for us. And so that's, low volume, stick built, bunch of different trades.
Yeah.
And on the last one, I had a clipboard with a piece of paper on it that the title said punch list, and I never wrote anything down on it.
Yeah.
So if a home builder can do that, I don't understand why boat manufacturers can't do it. Yeah. And they're building a boat in a controlled environment, in a factory, and typically even, they're building 20, 30, sometimes several hundred of them. Yeah. I just don't get it.
Well, I was going to say the low volume custom work, but it's exactly what you said, that your home is the same thing. It's low volume custom built. So you would think, I think partially it's the range of options you can install. It's the and also the complexity. I mean, a house is so much simpler in terms of overall equipment installed. There's no alternators, there's no grounding systems. There's a whole list of stuff that's not installed, and maybe it's just the lack of complexity. Imagine if we take the engines out of the boats and take out the battery systems and all that stuff. And I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always baffled me. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Same.
And you look at cars these days. I mean, cars are unbelievably good. You just
Yeah.
drive them off the lot and you change the oil every 10,000 miles and it lasts forever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just boats have there's something clearly I don't understand. So, and if anyone's listening to this who works for a boat manufacturer can sort of help explain this, would be great.
Yeah. Tell us why all the challenges.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And to fix that stuff, once you ship the boat to your customer, it costs you a fortune.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's so much easier to. So there's a person who wrote a book that said quality is free. A very, very famous book in sort of the manufacturing world. And his point was fix it when you're building it, not once you've delivered it to the customer, because then it costs you a fortune.
Yeah.
So anyway, I digress. So talk a little bit about when you go look at an existing boat, someone's boat. Let's say I called you up and I said, hey, Conor, I want you to do an electrical audit for me. Kind of crawl through my boat. It's a 2009 boat, production boat. What are the types of things you look for? What do you sort of bring your magnifying glass out and look around for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I usually start at the heart of the system, which is the batteries. The highest, the largest conductors are often the most dangerous because they can create the most heat, right? The smallest conductors will usually fail open, and the circuit will be, if you had a dead short, small conductor will burn quick. It won't generate that much heat because it'll burn quickly and open itself. But if you have a 2-watt battery cable that shorts out, that is a ton of heat that can be released before that conductor actually melts itself apart. So usually start at the batteries and look at the connections, fusing, distribution of all that power. It's usually the ends of the wire that are the biggest problems, where they connect and how they connect. And I mean, the advances we've had in fuses that people are not taking advantage of, especially with older boats. Can you imagine the conductors that are starting your engine? They are the size of your, pinky or your index finger, right? How much current they can carry, and they've been strapped to a rattling engine for 40 years. And those conductors are not required to have a fuse on them per ABYC because they're used to start the engine. And so you have these just large conductors strapped to batteries that can create thousands of amps, and they haven't been thoroughly inspected in 4 decades. I mean, back when typewriters were being used when they were installed. So that for me, that's usually where I start. The battery banks, power goes to the engine, and where that power distributes and stuff. And that usually I can fill up a few hours of problems right there, getting those kind of things solved, and recommending fuses in places that A are sometimes required and B are sometimes not required, and that can solve a lot of problems. And of course now the docks are changing. Docks have now increased sensitivity to leakage currents. So new pedestals on new docks are now more sensitive to the power coming out to returning. If there's they are more attuned to mismatches. If you have power going somewhere it shouldn't, they're going to shut off power at the dock more often now. And so things that weren't a problem for many years are now a problem. So now you have to go through the AC system and check all that, and making sure that there's a clean connection from your AC system ground back to the dock. So if you ever have a problem, if somebody starts to get electrocuted, you need a safe path for that power to go back to the dock, and ensuring that is connected and in order. So yeah, doing some of those tests are really important and very common.
Yeah. So how can I tell if the pedestal on my dock is one of these newer advanced ones versus an old one?
Usually,
is there a way visually I can tell?
I mean, if it's new or not. I mean, the outside will also have the new breakers will have a indication. They'll show the sensitivity. And, if it's an old breaker that's old and rusty and looks like a household breaker, then it's not.
Yes.
But if it's a newer one, it'll say usually in the face of it what its sensitivity to leakage is.
I see. So it's almost like a GFI breaker I might have in my home.
Yes, it's essentially a GFCI, and there's a little bit of variation between a GFCI and what they use in a boat called an ELCI, a earth leakage circuit interrupter. But the idea is the same: looking for power that's coming back, that's going somewhere not on its proper path. And the way a GFCI or ELCI do it are slightly different, but basically along the same lines. And so if you if you have the thing is with boats, right? We have so many systems that are connected to the seawater. So like your air conditioners, and you have, hot water heaters, and you have direct connection to the seawater, which is connected to the ground. So you have a third path. And if any of one of these start to get old, these systems, they leak power into the water, and they can start tripping those breakers. So you got to go through and find that. And people like me are very expensive, an electrical technician, right? So people naturally are doing it themselves. They aren't fully aware of how to do it. And then you have 40 years of people doing it themselves and little mistakes that build up and they aren't documented. And then you get on a boat and there are some horrifying discoveries of wires that are just incredibly wrong and, things like that. But the problem with power is that you don't necessarily know it's not safe because it works, but you don't know, unless you check it, you don't know if the system is safe. Is the ground actually connected? Is these things in place? So,
right. So, Conor, my boat has an isolation transformer on it. So I don't know what that does. What does that do?
So that is a tool to stop the galvanic corrosion. So when you plug in your boat to the dock, you have now electrically connected your underwater metal to every other boat's underwater metal, right? So the green wire that comes from the dock through your shore power cord connects to every other boat on the dock. So now literally 20 boats have paralleled all of their underwater metals together. And so essentially you can have these circuits that electricity is migrating its way slowly through that ground wire and eating away your metal. So that isolation transformer, or other people put in a galvanic isolator, are an attempt to stop those little currents from eating away your metal, but also allow you, if there's ever a dead short in your system and we're going to get electrocuted, there's a safe path still for the high voltage AC to go through the ground, but it blocks the little currents that will eat away your metals over a long time. And it's so it's just a way to protect your metals, because it's a unique situation that you've connected all these boats in parallel in that have a connection, both the ground wire plus also through the seawater.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you for that explanation. That was really helpful.
Did it make sense? Does that give the gist of?
Yeah, I get it.
Okay.
And as with many things, right? These things get discovered the hard way. 20, 30 years ago, people are scratching their heads. Why are all these boats, galvanic? Yeah. Oh, look at all the currents going around. So there's all sorts of funny current loops hanging around. So how involved are you in like solar installs and sort of, those types of systems?
Yeah, pretty familiar, pretty intimate with that, because when I designed the system, so I do a lot of lithium iron phosphate battery installations. And to do that, you really do it safely. You really have to re-engineer the system, or at least look at every component in your system. So, I work with boat owners and they say, I want to live off grid. I'm going to be, we have 2 people working remote, which means 2 computers and a Starlink. And that means fans during the day and, all these systems, right? And so you look at the power consumption and then you figure out how they want to make it. Do they have a big generator they're already using? Do they, what is their mix of power available? And it's solar, generator, alternators from an engine. And so I look at how to size all that and stuff. And so we kind of design a system that gives them lots of power and that won't be lots of time on the engine to recover all that energy. So I do a lot of solar, hard panels and soft panels. I try not to get too heavy in the actual installation of it. There's other people that do that. I help them do it. I help them get the people in need. I try to stay on the electrical side of things, and but definitely work hand in hand with how much solar, size in it, give them expectations for what they're talking about doing, how many hours in the generator, it will or will not be, depending on what they are talking about with solar.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like that technology is pretty changing pretty rapidly these days.
Yes and no. The cost is changing rapidly. The technology is pretty consistent. The
Okay.
biggest improvements have been soft panels, flexible panels. They are getting more robust. They're getting more capable. Hard panels are getting cheaper. In the last 5 years or 10 years, I mean, the overall efficiency of solar panels have gone from 19% to 22%. It's a pretty small change, but in those 5 or 10 years, the prices have gone down by 10 times or 8 times. It's a huge change in cost for the same panel. But so we are seeing the cost come down so much. It's making solar a lot cheaper. When I was homeschooled aboard a boat when I was younger, my parents pulled my brother and I out of school when I would have been in 7th grade and homeschooled us aboard a sailboat. We traveled. And I remember being in Fort Lauderdale, Florida in the fall of 2001, going to the boat show there, and we were trying to figure out how we were going to power the boat. We had to homeschool ourselves. My parents were running an office from the boat, and we had to figure out the same decisions I'd help other people make, we were making then. And then it was high output alternator and wind generator, because solar was so expensive, and it had small output for its cost, and shading was a big issue. So now costs for solar are way down. They're more shade tolerant. And now I think most people are opting for solar because it's so long lasting. It's simple. It's big output, and 100 watt, 120 watt solar panel in the footprint of a wind generator will outproduce most wind generators in that thing. Plus they last 20 years. So it's a big pro.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. So talk to us a little bit. I want to change topics here. Talk to us a little bit about sort of your sailing adventures, kind of, where you've sailed. Give us a couple of highlights there.
Okay. So I was born in Chicago, and I was a summer baby in Chicago. So my parents were avid sailors, and they always say they weren't going to miss the rest of the season because I was born. So I was out on the water at a very young age, a couple weeks old, out sailing with my parents when they had a 30-foot sailboat, and grew up summer sailing in the Great Lakes. My parents always talked about a bigger trip with my brother and myself, and so eventually they pulled us out of school. We took off. We were homeschooled for a year and a half, went down up into Canada, down the East Coast and through the Bahamas. And I think that really solidified my love for being on and near the water, love for the ocean, love for weather, and meeting people, just everything about it. I mean, it's fascinating. It's incredible. And so stuck with it. And later went to school in South Carolina, where I raced on the local racing fleets. There was a coastal racing association that I raced boats on. And after graduating college, my buddy and I flew down to Brazil and jumped aboard an old wooden schooner. It was a 55-foot wooden schooner, really traditional boat. It was a fiberglass hull, but it was wooden, everything else. And the skipper of that boat was a real tough old school sailor. He was a bosun on the British sail training ships, and he ran his boat like he was still in the British Navy. And real tough guy, but learned a lot of good seamanship principles and practices with them. And we were supposed to go from Brazil down over to South Africa, but instead he wanted to go up the Northwest Passage. So we did a equatorial trip around up by the coast of South America to the Caribbean. And we kind of boat hopped and hitchhiked our way from that boat ended in Antigua. We jumped aboard a boat to go up to Cuba. We spent a couple weeks in Cuba, and that boat took me down to Panama. And I had the decision at that point. I had an acceptance letter to the University of Miami in my hand to go study marine physics at the University of Miami, or I was on a boat with 3 other young people that were leaving for Tahiti in a few weeks. And I had to make the decision, am I going to stay aboard the boat and sail to Tahiti, or do I return to the States and go to grad school? And that was a really tough decision. But I remember telling my grandfather about, I was like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. You know, like, I never really dreamed of a PhD, and the effort and it was never a dream of mine, but I had this opportunity that like seems hard to pass up. And he was a survivor of World War II. He was a medic in France in the Battle of Bulge. And he looked at me and said, what I would have done in order to go to grad school and get a PhD instead of the life that I led, you know, going to war. And I guess that stuck with me enough that I flew back and went to grad school and got the PhD in marine physics. And that was a really cool experience. I lived on a boat. I mean, aside from the studies, being in Miami with like-minded, hardworking people was really cool. That was an amazing experience. And what was really, I think, unexpected was that everybody in grad school has some reason for their passion studying what they're studying. You know, there's marine physics, there's marine biology, there's marine chemistry, there's meteorology, all these air and ocean sciences. And everybody universally you could go to and say, hey, how did you get into yada yada? And they go, oh, this one time I was on this beach and this fish, or this one time this, you know, cloud came and it blew this over. I thought that was, you know, like everybody had some story. And I guess so I fit in with me. Everybody would ask me and I'd like, oh, I used to live on a boat and I used to do right. So like I was just kind of another person with a passion for the ocean and stuff. And so it was a very cool experience, but definitely miss sailing, even though living aboard the boat. And my partner and I at the time, after graduation, took off from Miami and sailed over to the Bahamas, then down to Panama. We spent the summer down in Panama, went over to Colombia, and then up to Jamaica. And then COVID started to hit, and we got locked down in the Bahamas for 3 months during the peak of COVID. And finished that, had an amazing time. I hate to say an amazing time, but the reality was it was an amazing time building off-grid yacht clubs and secluded islands while in these beautiful paradise. And but after that trip, we came back to the States and we had our 1.5 years of cruising. We sold the boat and moved to Jacksonville. That's where I am now.
Yeah.
So that's abbreviated version of a lot.
Yeah. Wow. You've certainly done a lot of stuff, and it looks like you're on a boat now. So tell us about your boat.
So this is a 1981 Swan 47. It is owned by Warrior Sailing. So Warrior Sailing is a nonprofit to help ill and injured veterans. And so if we called it, the joke is if we called it group therapy, nobody would show up. So we call it offshore sailing. And we found that the medium of sailing is a great way to help heal some of these unseen injuries like PTSD and depression. And, you know, when there's a teamwork oriented sport with a goal or mission, you know, it's really taps into a lot of the training that these men and women that got in the military. And so my role with the program is to teach kind of the electrical and mechanical systems to the veterans. So they've usually when I see them, they've learned to sail. They are now buying boats. They're going on deliveries. They're doing more and more boating adventures. And they are running into problems where the boats are, you know, the lights are shutting off. The engines are not starting. You know, they're just typical electrical issues. And so I teach a course for these veterans that I call the essentials of the multimeter, right? What is a multimeter? I got one right over here somewhere. What is a multimeter? What are the 5, you know, main functions of it, and what you should do before you leave a dock? You know, let's say you're going to go out for the day or for the weekend or whatever trip. You know, where are the batteries? What to look for? How to check if the batteries are charging from the engine? How to check if the batteries are charging from the generator? Just some basic troubleshooting and tips like that. So that's my
Excellent.
role with the program. This is one of the donated boats. This is part of our fleet, and I caretake this boat and use it as the medium for teaching these skills.
Oh, very nice. How many of these warrior sailing locations are there around the country? Do you know?
It's a tough question. We teach, there's like 4 main locations from San Diego, California, St. Pete, Michigan, and down in Miami are kind of the hubs of where we teach courses. I just have a small role with the organization doing my small portion, but I think there's been over 700 graduates that have come through our program and learned to sail. And I think, so the Warrior Sailing is part of the US MMA Sailing Foundation, which is a foundation that was created to get boats to cadets at Kings Point, the Merchant Marine Academy. So overall in the foundation, there's I think over 60 or 70 donated boats that are used for either training cadets or for warrior sailing for helping veterans. So it's a lot of fleet, and that's all across the states, really. So I keep this boat in Jacksonville, Florida. I maintain it and then host several events a year to help train and teach the veterans with this boat. And then
Very nice.
We own it for 3 years, and then we sell it and use the proceeds of the boat to keep funding the program.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. That must really be a rewarding thing that you do when you see the people that you deal with and the veterans and how something like this can bring them together and give them new energy.
Yeah. It is so true. And I am so lucky that I have 2 passions that have come together, right? Like to be able to teach sailing and electrical systems. It is truly, I've never discovered, like when you find your niche of your passion and your abilities and you're able to teach it to people who are interested, it's a magical thing for sure. And yeah. I hosted the event this spring, and we had some hands-on troubleshooting on a boat with some broken systems, and we're like halfway through it. The day was getting on. I was like, so what do you guys want to do? We're all pretty sure this is the problem. Do you want to dive in and fix it, or do you want to just believe, should we just kind of, let it lie and, assume we got it fixed? Like, oh no, we're going to get this. We want to do it. So the energy was so good. It was so exciting. And yeah, it's certainly to see people, go from 0 to 10 in one weekend and get some good skills and apply it and enjoy it it's
yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful that you donate so much time and energy to helping the veterans. That's wonderful.
I think I get more out of it than I put into it. So it's it works both ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk a little bit about what you've done with your PhD. I understand that maybe you've done a little bit of traveling and been mapping something in the ocean.
Yeah. So my PhD was in marine physics, and which is kind of like how the waves and currents interact. It's like, if you study biology, it's what's in the water. Physics is how the water moves. It's the depths of the ocean. It's, how the wind blows and creates waves and how those currents interact. And so it's the kind of the physical side of the ocean. So my job that brought me to Jacksonville was doing seafloor mapping, which I did for 3 years. There's a local company. They had a fleet of survey boats, and we would map the seafloor. And often it was for dredging contracts. So we were the independent surveyor that would say, yep, they moved the bottom from 38 feet to 40 feet, right? And so like our survey was really critical and for ship clearances, and then also for those dredgers to get paid. But post-storm disaster response, if there is a natural disaster and you have debris in the water, we had the equipment that could go identify if the channel was clear, if there's debris, was there shoaling, is there enough water to bring a ship with fuel into the port, right? That was kind of the stuff we did. And so, yeah, what that job took me, I always say, to the very best and the very worst places in the world, because we went from industrial ports to toxic ash ponds to billionaires' private islands. So it's literally been everywhere from very bad to very good.
Wow. That's great.
most recently, I was in Africa. So one of the skills I learned in grad school was using an instrument called an ADCP, which is a device you mount to a boat, and it measures the speed of the water moving relative to the boat. So you have a really accurate GPS in the boat, and this instrument looks down and it measures the speed of the water moving side to side. So this is used often for one instance is if you want to put hydro turbines in a river to make electricity, this instrument can figure out, is there enough current to make that project profitable, right? So I was just in Africa in Democratic Republic of Congo, trying to map out the currents along a river where our company wants to install some equipment. So yeah, it's that job takes me all over. So
Wow.
that was it was quite the trip.
Yeah. Wow. So let me ask you this question. What's your next big adventure? What's on the horizon for you?
Ooh, it's a good question.
Right. Yeah, what question are you going to ask your grandfather? Should I do this or should I do this?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's a good question. I hate to say I don't have anything really big on the horizon. I feel like I've done a lot. I didn't mention it, but I took off last spring across the Pacific Ocean with some friends, and I feel driven now to be a little more financially responsible and build up some savings. So the short-term plan is to enjoy some local cruising and save some money, and like to buy a rental home as investment. But the sailboat, the Swan that I caretake, currently we just dropped the rig, and so we are a motorboat right now, a long, skinny motorboat, and there's a lot of rivers here in Jacksonville that are now accessible for the first time because we have such a short rig height now. So not quite as exciting as cross the Pacific Ocean, but I'm really looking for the next few weekends to do some real small creek exploration with the sailboat. There's
Nice.
a river nearby called Black Creek, and I intend to go as far up as I possibly can before I run out of water or the ability to turn around. So
nice.
That's
Nice.
the next thing. So.
Well, hopefully the water gets shallower faster than the river gets narrow, because turning a sailboat around is not. You might have to be reversing for a while.
I might have to back it out. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So tell us about going across the Pacific. More specifically, what was sort of the biggest surprise for you? And sort of, you're thinking about it. Okay, I'm going to do this. You have a certain level of expectation, and then what was the biggest surprise?
The biggest surprise. Probably the biggest surprise was how amazing the landfall was on the other end. That I guess the trip went kind of as what I expected. It was gonna be hot. It was 20 days at it was bumpy, it was flat calm, there's all these various conditions, but the amazingness of the landfall, it was breathtaking. We made landfall in the French Polynesia and the Marquesa Islands, and we quarantined at Fatu Hiva. It's this beautiful island. You couldn't imagine a more beautiful, idyllic place. It reminds you, it makes you feel like you're in Jurassic Park with these perennial clouds that sit over and drop warm, moist air on top of this island, and you're anchoring this little valley, and you have you get bathed in this aroma, air is full of these dirt and earthy vegetation smells. And after you've been at sea for 20 days and you've cleaned out your nose to any kind of terrestrial smell, and you pull up behind this island and you drop the hook, it is just, I wanted to cry. I did cry. I mean, it was so emotional.
Wow.
It was so amazing. I mean, the landfall was so incredible. Of course, it was great to like not have a night watch that night, so that was also just a huge relief. But I knew it was gonna be an amazing place. That was really breathtaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
The trip was more sailing than we expected too, which is a great. I guess that was the second unexpected part of it. Most people end up encountering the doldrums, which is between the northern and southern hemisphere, this area of light winds, and we never saw that. We got wind the entire way, and we sailed. We were close reaching across those doldrums, doing 8 knots and flying the whole way. And then in the 2,700 miles, it took 20 days, and we end up only motoring the engine for 90 minutes of that time.
Wow.
And now we regret like heck that we started the engine for those 90 minutes, because we otherwise would have sailed the entire way, which would have been really cool. But we expected we were going to be calm for several days, so we didn't think anything of it. When the wind died, we cranked the engine, and kind of motored through it. And then, in hindsight, we wish we just would have slatted it out for another hour and a half and sailed the entire way. But yeah.
What was the most challenging part of a long passage like that for you?
I think it's really hard to be in the moment, and a long ocean passage goes by quickly and is really engaging when you're not anticipating the arrival. If you are in the moment and you're sailing and all your focus on is the next 4, 6, or 10 hours, if that's all you focus on, it's just wonderful. It's a simple life. I mean, you wake up and you kind of like have a coffee and you think, okay, I need to check that piece of rigging today. I need to, it's my day to cook lunch, so I'm going to do that. I should clean up this, or, ooh, I look forward, it's going to rain, so I'm going to wash this jacket. If that's all you're focusing on, it's a magic getaway where it's tough, it's hot, it's motion, those things are occurring, of course, but you get lost in it. You're like so in the little moment of the simple life, and then all of a sudden a week or 2 passes. And I think the hardest thing is not allowing yourself to be thinking about the arrival, to be expecting it, to be excited, because that kind of breaks your mental rhythm. And so I think the biggest challenge was kind of being in the moment and not expecting it. My wife was at home, and so I was kind of feeling bad for being away for so long. I wanted to get there because I wanted to see this beautiful place we're arriving and have enough time before flying home. So I think it was hard for me to balance the kind of my connections to land versus being in the moment. So as silly as that was probably my biggest challenge. You get used to the sailing, you get used to the sleep interruptions. That all kind of falls in. After day 3, you're kind of in that rhythm. It's making sure you're enjoying the trip despite the small challenges of the weather and that stuff. And and so I think that's really important, though, because that's what makes the trip so satisfying, is kind of when you tie your biggest concerns or your happiness to things like the weather. If you're in a good mood because it's great weather, and in a bad mood because it's bad weather, it's I think a really healthy way to regulate your emotions, right? Like on land, we regulate our happiness based upon job promotions, new cars, all these like superficial things, right? When you're sailing at sea and your happiness is tied to the weather, it's just such a harmonious way to live. And it's like such a it just, when you're feeling down because weather's bad, intuitively you're going to feel better in 2 days when the weather comes this way. Right. It's like a great thing to look forward to. And then when you're happy again because the weather's good, it's like the best happiness there is around, right? It's such a thing. So I think it's really important to kind of like control your expectations, be in the moment, and I certainly had to work hard on this trip to kind of be in that moment. And then everything else falls into place. The night watch you get through, everything else, you just do it because you have to. You have no choice.
Right. Very well said, Conor. Very well said. Yeah, there's sort of like operational things like watch and cooking, and then there's sort of the emotional aspects of it.
Yes.
And the operational things, you sort of get into a groove and, you say, okay, I got to do these things, but it's the emotional things that, even in life, not just on the sea, but
Yes.
those are the challenges. Well,
Yeah.
you said that very well. I think you should write a book about that.
And it controls your experience, right? Like,
Right.
if you are hot and sweaty in the galley cooking, and you allow yourself to be miserable, it'll be miserable, right? But if you are
Right.
looking forward to it being cooler because the wind's going to come more behind you, and then you kind of just you sweat it out, knowing that in a day or two it's going to be different, and yeah, it changes the experience. So
Yeah, when you just said that, it reminded me years ago. I read this book by the Dalai Lama. The title of the book was "The Art of Happiness." And I'm not a big Dalai Lama fan. I think my son gave me this book, which might be telling. But anyway, said, "Hey, Dad, read this book." And I read this book, and it was a hard read. It was like 350 pages. And my one sentence summary of the book is, you're the one who decides whether you are happy or not.
Yeah.
How do you want to be? Right. And that it was very, very insightful to me. So you're right. If you decide you want to be miserable, you'll be miserable. So excellent. Hey, we've been chatting for over 45 minutes here. I want to start wrapping this up. You've been a wonderful guest. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Ooh, I think we hit the big topics. I would say it is really one of the best things I did sailing was to study more about the physics around me. I guess that's, seems clear given my path in studying physics, right? But like, I would say, so I guess it's kind of more like a recommendation for listeners, right? But like, if you are a sailor or if you are, a passionate water person, spend the time, pick up a book about ocean sciences and stuff like that. They make some great kind of coffee table books and stuff. And I think that's it can be a great resource to help build up your safety and security and knowledge of ocean stuff. But I guess it's more of a recommendation. It's not much of a something that you haven't asked me about. But that's one thing. Just understanding tides and currents and things. I think it's a really it's a wonderful way to build up your trivia if you're at a party to offer some fun some knowledge of it, but it also gives you great insight into what's actually happening around you, and it builds your pleasure, right? It's like when you understand more intuitively what's happening around you, it's really it's a wonderful feeling. But
that's a great point. Oftentimes the more knowledge we have about something, the more that we respect it and enjoy it.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. It's well said.
That's great. So Conor, you've been a wonderful guest. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it, Bela. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
So Bela, this was really interesting. I love Conor's story. Teaching, sailing, helping boat owners keep their boats well maintained. Sounds like a really cool life. What are your big takeaways from your conversation with Conor?
So I think Conor is a great example of an individual who has figured out how to take his passion and make it your life and incorporate it into many things that you do in life, not just what you do on weekends or in evenings, but also sort of what you do during the day. So I thought that was a really good lesson, and you hear people talk about that a lot. And it's easy to talk about, but it takes commitment to do it. It takes commitment of stepping off the curb or taking that first step in that direction. And I give him a lot of credit for that. And I found his story kind of really inspiring, right? He's done it both on the education side. He's involved in sort of the marine community from a education side. He became a master technician, electrical technician, to work on boats. And he's involved with Warrior Sailing, which is just a great organization, right? They're helping veterans by talking about sailing skills and helping them learn sailing, giving them some focus, giving them that camaraderie that comes from a group that you're a part of. And in many ways, it's sort of similar to Patriot Sailing, We've had guests in the past talk about Patriot sailing, which is more sort of on the competition side. Warrior sailing is more sort of on the education side and learning how to sail. And it's interesting, Mike, as you know, I fly fish as well. And there's a similar thing to warrior sailing and fly fishing, where they get veterans out to go fly fishing and sort of appreciate, that hobby or skill or sport, whatever you want to call it. So I think those types of things are really great. We're helping our veterans. And, even though there hasn't been, a world war since the 40s, there's been a lot of wars, and there's been a lot of veterans who've been injured and killed. And I think that I really I'm always very appreciative and thankful to these organizations that get together and try to reach out to veterans and help them. My hat's off to them. I support several of them, and I always like to bring them to the forefront and have people kind of think about that a little bit.
Couldn't agree more, Bela. Well said. But yeah, Conor's whole integrating all of these parts of his life together, it's really entrepreneurial in a lot of ways, which is really cool. But let's tease some of this apart for a second. And let's talk about the electrical onboard systems issues first, because this was really fascinating for me. I kind of knew, but didn't really make all the connections with how important electrical systems are to the safe operation of a boat. And, this whole thing about learning, like, okay, something works and we patch it together. And then year after year, you kind of don't take care of these things, and they can really grow into a big safety problem if you're not careful year in and year out. And I know you fought a bit with electrical systems over the years. We've talked about this a little bit on this podcast. What are the best takeaways that our listeners should be focused on when it comes to the electrical systems in boats?
Well, I think it's sort of analogous to buying a house. If you buy a new house, then sort of the electrical system, the plumbing system, all of the systems are sort of current and sort of up to current standards. So my son and his wife, a number of years ago, bought a house that was built in the 1920s. So a pretty old house. And, they've been going through it and rehabbing it kind of down to the studs. And the other day, I was actually helping him. Last week, I was helping him, and we were looking at the old chimney. And this light went off in my head. It says, now I understand why such a large percentage of house fires are in old houses. Right? The light went off in my thick skull. It's like, oh my gosh, look at this old chimney. It's got cracks in it all over the place. It's just a problem waiting to happen. And so it's very similar in a boat, and a boat that's 30 years old is an old boat, and the technology has changed a lot. The wiring standards have changed, batteries and the electrical usage has changed. So the electrical capacity of the boat, just like in a house built in the 40s, used a lot less electricity because there were fewer appliances. There were fewer things that used electricity. So the capacity didn't need to be as great. Well, today we use a heck of a lot more electricity. The same thing is true on a boat. So the capacity of the systems are not there. So you need to think about that. And when you overload an electrical system, what happens? It gets hot. And sometimes it gets real hot. And it's enough to catch fire. So that's a real problem. And, fires on boats are really, really bad news and dangerous because there's nowhere to go. It's like you're on the 50th floor of a high-rise apartment and your room's on fire and there's nowhere to go. So that's really bad. So I think his notion of this sort of getting a checkup, and that's one of the things that boat surveyors do. So when you buy a boat, just like you buy a house, you get a home survey. It's very common when you buy a boat, you get a boat survey, but they really don't go through at least the surveys that I've had, they don't really crawl through the electrical system deeply. And I think Conor's suggestion of kind of having an audit, a healthy boat checkup, so to speak, I think is a really good one. And just like anything else that you buy that some previous owner had, you have inherited all of the things that the previous owner has changed. And you have inherited all of the skill they have or the lack of skill they had. that comes with it. And it's really difficult to sort of sort through all of that. So I just thought it was something I've never really thought about before, in sort of the depth that, Conor made me think about it.
Cool. Neat. I also like Conor's point about kind of simplifying his emotional well-being he was talking about when he was crossing the Pacific, and disconnecting happiness with financial and external elements, what kind of car you have, what kind of house you have, and really be more in tune with your environment and yourself. I thought this was a really cool approach, and I was really been thinking to myself, okay, how can I work on this even in my landlubber life, right?
Yeah.
So that was a really cool, I think, approach. And, we've talked to a lot of people about who've done these long trips. And it seems like this is a common thread through a lot of those, but he put it really eloquently, I thought, in terms of really being connected with the weather and the water and the boat, and that being your focus for, weeks or months. It was a really neat way to frame it. I really like that. And then I guess my last question for you, and we've kind of talked about this a few ways, and you're usually pretty consistent, but I like to keep asking, do you have any interest in crossing the Pacific at any point in your life?
Oh, Mike, I've been across the Pacific probably a dozen times, maybe more.
On a sailboat.
Oh, it was always on an airplane. And even that was long and boring. So no, I'm not at that point in my life where that's of interest to me.
So sticking with the East Coast.
I'm sticking with coastal cruising, and maybe doing an occasional overnight. But I'm not interested in those long journeys. However, here's what I will say about, and here again, I thought Conor was spot on and really inspirational. Whenever you do something that sort of takes you away from your daily routine, you could hike the Appalachian Trail, or like my son and his wife hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, which is the West Coast version of the Appalachian Trail, where you're away from everything. And you're disconnected from the world. You're sort of disconnected from the challenges and worries that you have on a daily basis in your sort of normal life. And you're much more sort of focused on, is it going to rain this afternoon or not? Right? I mean, I don't really care if it rains this afternoon or not. It doesn't really change what I'm going to do. But if you're sailing, you're much more in tune to the weather. You do anything outside, you're much more in tune to the weather, to what's going on around you, and absorbing all of that. And I always find that to be refreshing, and sort of it gives you time to think. Oftentimes it's very challenging to be able to take time out from your normal life and sit down and think for a half hour. And when you're doing these long ocean passages, and the longest one I've done, I think, is 3 nights, so I think it was 4 days, 3 nights. And there's a lot of time you're doing nothing. The boat's sailing really nice. The weather's perfect. And quite frankly, you got nothing to do. So you have lots of time to contemplate, or to read, or to do some of these other things that you normally don't get to do. So I think that's one of the attractive parts of this. And for me, I can accomplish that by going out for a day sail, because it works for me. And do I wish that maybe when I was 40 or 50, I did a super long passage across the Atlantic, or across the Pacific or something like that? Yeah. But, I realize that now at my age, quite frankly, I don't have the energy or the stamina to be able to do that. So it's more of a, it's more of a, it's not a lack of desire. It's more of a realization that I'm 70 years old, and, that's probably not the wisest thing for me to do.
Know your limits and your available resources.
Yeah.
Just like any good entrepreneur. And, you know, you talk about, oh, would I have done this when I was younger? You've done a heck of a lot of really cool things in your life. And I mean, I think the listeners who've been listening to us for a long time have gotten little bits and pieces of this. So, you know, I certainly don't think you should look back and say, oh, shoulda, coulda, woulda, because you've done some amazing things, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But
well, thank you. And yeah, I'm not saying that to be regretful that I didn't, but it's not the right time. And it won't ever be the right time.
No, anymore. But now you have the right boat for it, which is kind of interesting, right? I mean, you
Right.
could do a really long sail on your boat right now. You know,
Yes.
you've got the size and the equipment, and right, it's kind of an interesting thing. But you know, this is the thing, that this could go to your kids, and maybe one of your kids will do it. You know,
Yep.
something like that, which would be cool. So
It would be cool.
or
Yeah.
the grandkids, you know.
Yeah, there you go.
Generational sailing, right? We've kind of talked about this in some of the previous episodes, but
Yep. All right. Hey, Mike, what do you think? Time to wrap this one up?
yeah, we're getting all sentimental. You know, I don't know if the listeners like it when we get all mushy, but you know, listeners, thanks for joining us for yet another episode. We hope that you found our conversation with Conor interesting and thought-provoking like we did. If you have questions about what we've discussed, as always, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, at gmail.com.
And thanks again to our sponsor of today's episode, Nautical Education. Get the knowledge and skills you need to enjoy sailing and cruising the East Coast of the United States or wherever in the world the wind takes you. Click on the link in the show notes to see all of the sail training modules that Nautical Education offers. They combine online learning, where and when it's convenient for you, with the hands-on skills development from experienced sailing instructors. By using the link in the show notes, it lets them know that their sponsorship of this episode works.
And finally, if you enjoy the podcast, please do hit that follow button on your podcasting app, or like, or whatever it is on what you're using. Help spread the word about the podcast, and leave us a review if you have something to say. If you know somebody that would make a good guest on the show, of course, let us know. But that's it for today's episode from over here in Münster, Germany. See you next time.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, and listeners, hope to see you out there on the water soon. So until next time, signing off. See y'all soon. All right.
Okay, do you like my radical reversal of our usual roles at the end?
Yes.